Hello. Thank you for joining me here on the Birth and Rebirth podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany, and today I bring you part 2 of Abby's birth stories. If you have not listened to part 1, go ahead and check that one out before you listen to this one. Enjoy.
Our last baby, I want to do things my way now. And, obviously in between that time, I had done more research. I had listened to more podcasts. I had watched more videos. I had all of this more kind of ammunition for me, to know that even though I've had this story so far, I can definitely learn to trust my body again and have the experience that I truly want. And so of course, the first thing I did was look for another midwife because in my mind, that's the only other option, right? And so I looked for a midwife, had a very hard time finding one because my due date was December 31st. And so, they have kind of some blackout dates during those months, like the holiday season and all that stuff. And so I applied at 5 weeks pregnant, and I actually didn't get a midwife till I was about, I think, 28 weeks. So I went quite a long time without a care provider. And then finally, when I got one, oh wait, let me back this because it's an important piece. So before I got the midwife, I started to lose hope. I was like, okay, I'm not going to find one. I emailed a bunch of clinics, just to see if they had availability, all of that kind of stuff. And I never heard back from anyone. And one of my mom friends was like, oh, have you ever thought about free birthing? And I was like, what's that? I had no idea what that was. And then she was like, oh, it's kind of like when you just kind of do it on your own. And I was like, what do you mean? And I was like, it perked my curiosity. It piqued my curiosity. And I was like, okay, I want to learn more about this. And so I started looking it up and stuff like that. And I was like, this is amazing. you know, and then I found out about birth keepers, right? Like traditional birth keepers. And I was like, okay, this is so cool. So I put out this call out in this Facebook group that was all on alternative birth measures. And there's midwives, there's a whole slew of people on there. And I put in my story. I was like, I'm 20 something weeks pregnant. I'm really wanting a home birth this time around. I'm looking for a midwife. I'm not having any luck. So now I'm interested in learning about free birthing. Anybody who's had that experience, would you be okay with DMing me and sharing with me your experience? And I got so many replies. So so many women reached out to me and they were sharing with me their stories, and I was so excited about it. I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then I got connected with a birth keeper, and we got on a Zoom call. We started talking, and she kind of shared with me what she does and all that kind of stuff. And I got a really good vibe from her. I was like, okay, I really like her energy. She's very confident, knowledgeable, all of that kind of stuff. So I was going to go with her. And then I get an email that got accepted into this midwife clinic, that they had an opening for me. So I was like, okay. So I put that in the back of my mind, the whole free birth option. And I was like, okay, I'll put that in the back of my mind. It's good to know that that is an option. And then I went with the midwife because it was the safer route, right? And so got connected with this midwife, and went through the weeks. And right away when I got connected with them, I told them, gave them my whole story. I told them about my first birth experience and how I was pretty much hell bent on having things my way this time, and that I wanted a home birth. That was a non-negotiable for me. I wanted my kids to be there. All of I had this whole picture in my mind, and knowing, but also cautious, right? Because I've had a picture in my mind before and I've had it blow up in my face, right? And so I was cautious, but I was still firm. I was like, this is what I want. And they were all about it. They were like, yes, we'll support you through that. And I gave them the warning that I've had gestational diabetes requiring insulin twice before, so likely will happen again. And they were like, yeah, we'll find ways and solutions. We'll be able to still support you in your wishes. And so as the weeks went on, and but this time I was very, very uh proactive. And so I started seeing a nutritionist, I started seeing a dietitian, a naturopath, to address my gestational diabetes, and started eating different foods, just making sure that I was doing everything in my power to like give myself the best chances, right? Like set myself up for success. And it did make a big difference. But then when I went for the gestational diabetes testing, you know, where you have to drink like the 1,000 milligrams of sugar drink,
Mm-hmm.
go through that test, and I failed it just by like 1 point, basically. So like the threshold to say to give you the diagnosis, I was 1 point over. So it wasn't like anything crazy. Like it wasn't like I was super like
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. But because I was the 1 point over, still gave me the diagnosis, right? And so had to go see the diabetic clinic. They put me on a low dose insulin, and you know, yeah, like it was still manageable. Like it wasn't anything that I was super alarmed about, because I was like, okay, I was just 1 point over. Like how ridiculous is this, you know? Like I've been doing everything on my end to make sure that, you know, I set myself up in a better place and stuff, right? So I still felt pretty confident about it, and I told them that I was like, you know, like I know that this you know, I have the diagnosis again, but like I'm still feeling pretty good. I'm feeling confident that, you know, I can do this and all that kind of stuff. And then so when things started to turn was when I went in. I was 37 weeks, and we started talking about induction because of the gestational diabetes. And so they were talking to me about the only option that I really had was castor oil induction, because it's like the natural induction and I can do that at home. And so I started asking a bunch of questions because I had never really heard about this. And so I started asking them a bunch of questions about it. And, you know, like, what does this mean? How much do I have to take? What are the, you know, like side effects, all of that kind of stuff. And the more questions I started asking, the more I can sense that she wasn't very comfortable, you know, like she was just kind of like hesitating and giving me some of the answers. I could just I sensed an energy shift, you know, in her confidence in what she was sharing with me. And right away I felt this pit in my stomach. I was like, this isn't really good, you know. And so mind you, up until this point, I have done an immense amount of work in like learning to trust myself again, right? Learning to trust my intuition, you know, my inner knowing, all of that kind of stuff. And so, and just have this like, yeah, like this confidence in myself again, right? And so, and the trust in myself. And so, you know, so she's like kind of like hesitant or whatever. I go home. And sure enough, I get an email the next day, and they were like, "Oh, like I know we're supposed to see you next week, but can you come in sooner? We need to talk with you." And so I was like, "Okay, I know this isn't going to be good." And so I go in. I'm 38 weeks pregnant at this time, and she pretty much is telling me, you know, after you left last time, um, I started thinking about our conversation. I started thinking about how I was like really felt ill-equipped to give you the information that you were asking me. She's like, because this is out of my scope. I've never done this before. It's out of my, she said out of my scope a number of times, and was like, you know, I just didn't feel yeah, like well equipped to answer all the questions that you were asking me. And so I went to like my board, and we've discussed this, and here are the options that like we can kind of give you or whatever, right? And so one of the main option was basically shared care. So like, you know, like would you be open to sharing care with like an OB? That would mean no home birth, but we can bring like, you know, the pool to the hospital. You can have it there, and like all this stuff. And as she's telling me all this, I just start to break down. Like I was just like, first of all, I was like super hormonal, super pregnant. I kind of knew this was my worst fear, like happening right in my face. And you know, I was just like bawling my eyes out, like just like, and she was, you know, holding space for me, and just kind of like, you know, you could tell she felt bad. And like I have nothing against these midwives. They were nice. They did the best that they could. At the end of the day, I understand there's liabilities, there's you know, legalities around their license, all of that kind of stuff. So I fully understand, but it wasn't what I had hoped for, right? And I had made it clear from the very beginning that this is what I wanted. This is the wishes I had and all that kind of stuff, right? And so,
Yeah, that I just want to say that is it's really disappointing to hear that you just asking for answers and clarity on the things that they were advising you to do is what caused that to kind of happen in their minds, and the insecurity that they had about being able to support you. And I just find that really interesting as someone who has supported women in birth. I see that so much. People who claim to know birth people who claim to trust birth and to know better than, the regular people do about birth, all those things. But the second they're put on the spot to give proper, informed consent, it's like it's almost like it kind of shatters their, this like this false idea that they're these heroes, or these saviors in the birth space. They're just regular people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
We as a people, in our society are taught to put these people on a pedestal,
Mm,
and that they're, there to save and protect us. But
yeah.
really at the end of the day, you are responsible for yourself, and that's it. and
Mhm.
and that and I think your story is a perfect example of that. Like, at the end of the day, they dropped you,
Yeah.
and you had to still, like, fend for yourself and figure out what your next turn was going to be.
Exactly.
Um so I
Yeah.
just want to say, like, good for you for digging and really trying to get those answers, because you
Mhm.
deserve them,
Yeah.
especially if you're going to make this decision for yourself and your
Absolutely.
baby.
Exactly, exactly. And once again, I was feeling like, yeah, just defeated, right? And so I came home after that difficult conversation. I told her that I needed to think on things. Came home, I told my husband what happened. Of course, I'm like emotional. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And right away I told him, like, I think I'm going to do the free birth. And he was like, and I'd already spoken to him about this and kind of explained it to him. And of course, he was a little bit apprehensive, right? Because it was like, what does that even mean? Like,
Yeah.
And so like I had to kind of advocate for myself. But like I said, we have like he just what he told me right away was like, if you feel you can do it, I trust you. He's like, and I will support you. He's like, if you're confident in what you can do, he's like, I'm confident with you. And I said, I'm confident in what I can do. I'm like, I've done everything I can. It wasn't like I was being neglectful or anything like that. Like I was being careless. Like, no, I had done absolutely everything to prepare my body, prepare my mindset, everything to have the birth experience that I so knew I deserved,
Mhm.
and so I told him, I was like, I think I'm gonna let them go and I'm gonna go the free birth way. And so that's what I did. So I basically emailed them. I let them know that I was gonna be discharging myself from their care. And then I went and I talked back to the same birth keeper that I had originally spoken to. And then I was like, I know this is short notice, like I'm literally due in 2 weeks, you know. And I was like, do you have space for me? And she made space for me. And the stars aligned. And she came over for like a prenatal visit with us, and we sat together for a few hours and had a discussion on pretty much anything and everything that could happen during birth, during and after, before, during, and after. I was blown away. I was like, what? That's a choice? What? Like I get a choice in that? Like I was so surprised by all these different things that I had choice over. Cause like in the past, they were just things that were done. They were like I never
Yeah.
got it. Nobody asked me for consent. Nobody asked me like, are you okay with this? Are you okay with no? Like it was just done. Right. So I thought these were standard protocols and practices for like the whole birth experience. I had no idea that this was actually like a choice, and even to the point where she was like, so who's going to catch the baby? And I was like, what do you mean? And then she's like, when the baby comes out, like, like, do you want to catch him, or is your husband going to catch him? Because like, with birth keepers, they're hands off, right? Like they're there literally just to like support you at a distance, right? Like it's all you, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I was ready for it. And I was like, yeah, like I was ready for that challenge. And so, we went through this like amazing session, and she was like my lifeline for those like the following 4 weeks. So what ended up happening was that obviously I didn't go, didn't induce. I decided from that point forward, I was just gonna like not have any more intervention. So I didn't go for any more ultrasounds. I didn't do the membrane sweep. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just said, if I'm truly, truly trusting in myself and my baby, things are going to happen the way they're going to happen. He eventually has to come, and when he's ready, I'm going to be ready. But this was me not knowing that he was going to come 2 weeks late. And I'm doing like air quotations because,
No.
I've been asked a lot about this experience, and a couple of things that people have asked me were like, like, what would you do differently? And I was like, number one, the one thing I would have done differently was not tell anyone my due date, because I
Yeah.
feel once people know your quote unquote due date, it's like the minute that you go over that date, there's something wrong with you. And there's
Yeah.
something wrong, right? You're like, you get all the well-meaning friends and family, asking like, is he here yet? What's going on? Why aren't you going to the doctors? Why aren't you getting a sweep? Why aren't you doing this? Have you tried castor oil? Have you tried this? All those kind of things, right? Because for some reason, it's almost like an expiration date. Like if you go past that date, you're expired. And it was like, no,
Yeah.
like, no. And so that's the one thing I would have done differently for sure. Is just like giving people a ballpark of like, I'm doing December or January, one of those months.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see. But it's also like it's insulting to the mother because I know that the people who do this, they're coming from a good place, hopefully, but it's like don't you think that I, out of everyone here, is the most concerned and cares the most about my baby? Like, of course I got this. Like, of course I'm, being mindful of the things that are
Yeah,
going on. Like, come on. You don't need to question this. Like,
exactly. Unfortunately, as we live in a society where we are conditioned to fear birth, right?
yeah.
And that if you're birthing, how dare you think you can birth a baby by yourself? Like, how dare you
Mhm.
think that your body knows what it's doing? Like,
Yeah,
like you
right.
have to have like it's just like we're so conditioned, and I was even conditioned to that, like where it was like wild to think like, that this even happens, like in this day and age that women choose to birth on their own. It's like, like why would you do that? Like those kind of things, right? And
Hmm.
so the more I looked into it and the more I started finding like inspirational accounts, like even your account, right? Like on social media, on Instagram, I started feeling more and more empowered, where I was like, women do this all the time. Like what's the difference between like like I want and the more I started learning about it, the more I started becoming even more convicted that I wanted a hands-free approach where it was like just me and the baby, just trusting the process, trusting my body, trusting him, and just letting things organically happen the way they're meant to happen, right? Like, don't get me wrong, the medical system is there for a reason, right? There are times when unforeseen circumstances happen, emergencies happen, where we do need the medical system. That's amazing. But when it's like a normal, natural, undisturbed, no complications, birth, it's a beautiful thing. Like we don't need to be like fearful of it or anything like that, right? But unfortunately, that's the society where we live in, where it's
Yeah.
like unheard of, and you're crazy if you think you can do this on your own, without
Yeah,
help.
because people view it like it's a medical emergency, where it's like a very, very, very small percentage could be, but
Mhm.
it's hard to even know what the real like statistic is because most births happen in hospitals.
Exactly.
So when they're medically managed,
Yeah,
more issues can arise.
exactly.
Um, but I'd be curious to know like how many emergency situations would we actually see in birth if the mother was the authority
Yes,
in the birth, and really just trusted and was had a hands-off, undisturbed birth experience. But
exactly.
anyways, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. I saw no, I saw this quote on Instagram actually, and it talked about how um any intervention during birth is birth sabotage. Any intervention.
Hmm.
Like whether it's a cervical check, whether it's anything, right? The minute that you poke and prod or do something that outside of like the mom and the baby, that's you're sabotaging,
Hmm.
right? And that's what happens. It's very normal, as you know, like it's very normal to have all these interventions, and it's not considered like, like a risk or anything like that. It's just like this is what you do, and so to get things going
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, right? And so, like, so my due date, quote unquote, came and went. And then suddenly it was like a mental game where it was like, 2 weeks of like every single day questioning from people, every single day, like having to like ward off all this, like, just well-meaning people, right? And but I just retreated to myself and continued to just really dig deep, connect with my baby. Like I would every single night have a bath and do like a meditation during my bath and just connect with my baby.
Mm.
Okay, like you're safe, I'm safe. I'm ready when you're ready, like just kind of calm myself to like and prepare myself that everything was okay, that nothing was gonna go wrong, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so at 41 plus 6, so I was just one day away from 42 weeks, I went into labor. So
I
went into
love that.
and I was like, by this point, like, because don't get me wrong, as much as I was rooted and grounded, I was still impatient. I wanted to meet my baby so badly.
I
I
mean, what
wanted it
pregnant
to
woman isn't at 41
exactly,
plus 6?
exactly.
Like,
At that point, I was sleeping sitting down, so you know how that is. Like you're super uncomfortable, like
yeah.
getting up to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes, all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? First, like I'm human still, and I was impatient, and I couldn't wait to see him. Like as I would even get emotional just thinking about it, right? So I did a lot of like just really mental preparation, and sure enough, that morning I go into labor, and yeah, and I start counting. Like I had a contraction counter and I started counting, and then I screenshotted my birth keeper, and I was like, okay, I think it's happening. And pretty much every day leading up to that day, she had to talk me off the ledge, because like I would message her and I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't take it anymore. Like, what do you think? Like, oh, she's like, she's like, baby's gonna come when he's ready, you're gonna be ready when he's ready, all of that. She just was so good, like so supportive, like never once made me feel inadequate or to question, like, am I doing the right thing or anything? Like, she just like really just gave me confidence, supported me, encouraged me. And I so appreciated that, right? Like in the noise that I was like struggling with all around me, she was just like she was a pillar, for me,
Mm.
and just so helpful. And so she came over, and it was funny because I had talked about how I wanted my kids to be at the birth. I had envisioned, like an evening birth, and my kids being like, in their jammies and ready for bed and like all of that stuff. But of course, I go into labor early in the morning and they all wake up. And so I have a 5-year-old, 3-year-old, 2-year-old. They all wake up, they're full of energy. And here I am in labor, trying to focus on the birth ball and like leaning my head against school, and they're coming and they're just being kids, right? And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is gonna work out. Like this is a bit distracting. And so made the executive decision to like get my mom to come and pick them up, because I was like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to focus, because when I went into labor, I go into a zone, right? And this time I did like hypnobirthing, so I was doing like a lot of like just affirmations and trying to get my mind space, because it really is a big mental game, the birth experience. And so my mom came and picked them up, and then it was just me, my birth keeper, and my husband. And it was just a super peaceful, calm, labor, where I was getting up, I was eating. I was like, when I felt hungry, I would eat something. I was drinking like tons of water, lots of like coconut water, all of that kind of stuff. Um, and then just kind of like, breathing through the contractions. So that was like around, like I said, like full on, like went into like more regular active labor, probably like, yeah, like in the morning time sometime. And so I did most of it on a birth ball, and just with my headphones on, and the birth pool was ready, like the water was ready, everything like that. And then probably around 3 o'clock, I decided to go in the water. So by that time, they were coming the more consecutively, the contractions. And I went into the water, and immediately when I go in the water, it was like this like relief. Like I go in and it was like, like it was just so nice. I can't even explain how relieving it was
It's the
to go into the
best.
water. It's like the best. And so then the contractions were coming and I'm sitting, because you know how the birth pools have the little seat. So I'm sitting on that seat and the contractions are coming in waves, and by this time I had taken off my headphones. This time it was just me, my breath, and my husband pretty much, like, with me. And then probably a couple hours of doing that. And then my birth keeper was like, why don't you try moving positions? Like try getting on on your hands and knees and like let gravity help you. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to do that, because I was actually starting to get a kind of a craving to move differently. And so I go onto my knees, and then it was game time. Like pretty much that's when things really, really picked up, and the contractions started coming like hot and heavy, intensely. And then eventually I was in transition. Like I was probably in the water for a couple hours before I actually finally gave birth. And so contractions came intensely. Then eventually it was in transition, and my birth keeper, thank God for her and my husband, they were like, he's almost here. You're doing so good. Like sometimes you just need those like words of affirmation of like, you're doing good, don't give up hope. Cause there comes that point where you're just like, I can't do this anymore, like,
Yeah, in transition, it's like the line.
you know,
What did I get myself
yeah.
into?
And like, like I'm a pretty like intense person, and I knew that I was gonna be primal for this birth. Like I knew I was gonna like whatever sounds were gonna come out of me was gonna be like whatever was gonna come out of me, and I'm like, I'm grunting and like all, and then eventually it becomes like whimpering, where it's just like, and then I'm sobbing in between contractions. It was just so intense, right? And then I got the feeling to push, where it was like, and it's so interesting how conditioned I had been up until this point, because when I got the urge to push, I remember in previous pregnancies in the hospital with my last two, when I got that urge, they would tell me, the nurses would be like, no, 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 don't push it, don't push it, let's just wait. And they would come and they would check me. They would see how like dilated I was.
Mhm.
And here I am like trying to hold my body from like doing something, like it's almost like something so natural, like coughing or sneezing, you're trying to like hold it, right? So it's like
Mhm.
so unnatural. And so then in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, do I push, or like am I okay? And I was like, no, man, like my body's telling me to push right now. So like, I like gave it my all, and pretty much like 4 pushes. It took 4 pushes for him to come out. And so like the first push, I,
Wow.
I gave it my all. I roared like just primal. And then I felt down just to see like if he was there. And sure enough, I felt his head. And I could feel like a sack. So like I think he was still in some water. And I was like, okay, good. So that gave me confidence. I'm like, okay, he's actually like it's happening. Like he's there. And then I pushed again, and then his head came out, and then I felt his face, and like I was like, okay, like I felt like excited, right? And then the next one, half his body, and then the last one, he finally came out, and it was the most surreal experience ever. Like he came out, and there was like this relief, and then I looked down, and he's like floating in the water, like looking at me,
Oh my goodness.
and then my husband's like, we're both looking in shock, right? And then I pick him up, and I look at him, and he's just beautiful. And me and my husband just start sobbing, and then I'm like rubbing his back, and he's just so peaceful, just looking around. And then he lets out his cry. And then of course we just lose it by that point, like just so emotional. And it was amazing. It was everything I could have
That's
imagined
incredible.
and more, like he came out, and it was so peaceful, so serene. There wasn't any like, that chaos that happens after birth, like in the hospital, where there's like the nurses come, and like the NICU team's there stand on standby, and like all this like chaos, right? And they come and they clean them up and all that kind of stuff. No, like this was so opposite. It was just so peaceful, so quiet, so calm. And I just got to hold my baby until I was ready to like, come out of the water. And then, and it was just a beautiful experience. And I was just so thankful. I thanked God immediately, like, thank you, God, like, that he's safe, I'm safe, like this was amazing. But it was funny because prior to this birth, when I had my babies, I always knew, like, we weren't done. And with this one, when I came out of the water, I was like, I'm never doing that again.
Wow.
I was
You
like,
just knew that was it.
I was
So, how long after did you birth the placenta? How was
pretty
that?
pretty quickly. So I came out. I was bleeding quite a bit. So my birth keeper was like, come out of the water because you're bleeding quite a bit. Come and lay down. And so I came out, and probably I want to say maybe 10 minutes. Like it was very quick. I laid down, and I held the baby, and I tried to latch him, and like when you latch, like you're contracting still, right? And then
Mhm.
suddenly I was like, oh, I feel something, and then sure enough, I birthed the placenta. I came out, and then I felt it. I'm like, I think the placenta just came out. So she just came and she looked, and she's like, yep, it's out. And so it was like really quick. And this is also the first time I've ever naturally birthed the placenta, because in all
Mhm.
three previous ones, I'd had the fundal massage, right, where they come and they,
Yeah.
which is torturous in
The
itself.
fundal torture. Yeah.
Yes. You know, yeah, I
I don't
came
know
up.
why they call it a massage. It's
I
like,
know.
it's very misleading.
Very, it's sometimes even worse than some of the labor pains. Like it was just, it
Seriously.
is awful. But yeah, no, naturally came out and everything, and ate again, had some fruit and lots of fluids. My mom came over, my daughter came over, and like the baby was still attached to the placenta when my daughter came, because we had told her, I had prepared her prior to birth. And she wanted to cut the cord. Like she was like, I want to cut the cord. And I was like, are you
Mhm.
sure? And she's like, she's 5, and she was like, yeah. So when she came, it was funny because like the placenta was in the bowl beside me, and she's like, Mom, what's that? I was like, it's called the placenta. I'm like, that's where the baby was attached to mommy, and that's how the baby was eating, and there's the cord, and we're like showing her. It was so cool. Kids are just so innocent and just,
Yeah.
they're very matter of fact, like, okay, like this is what it is, this is what it is. There's no fear, like
Hmm.
she at it, and she's like, wow. And then I was like, do you still want to cut the cord? And she was like, yeah. But then when like we brought the scissors over and stuff, and this was an hour later, so the baby was attached for about an hour. And when it came down to it, she got scared. She was like, "Nah," like she saw a little bit of blood. She's like, why is it bleeding? And then so then dad assisted with cutting the cord. So the two of them did it together. And it was just the sweetest
Oh,
thing.
that's so sweet.
It's her baby brother. It's my oldest, this like full circle moment of like what happened with her. And here was big
Mhm.
sister with her baby brother. And like, in the birth I'd always dreamed of, and it was
Yeah.
incredible. It was so healing and so beautiful. And I feel like every single mom deserves to have, the birth of their dreams. Why not? Why not? And,
Yeah.
that's the whole reason why I speak like about my experiences, because if anything, and again, this isn't for everyone. I'm going to disclaim that this is my personal experience, is my journey. Carefully made the decisions around every single like milestone and monument, all of that kind of stuff. I was very, very like nobody like, you know, coerced me or anything like that, right? Like it was just very much like my own careful consideration. And like I say, like it's not for everyone, but my wish is that there's other moms that can see what the possibilities are, right? Like and hear about what it could possibly look like potentially for them. If not, at least they know that there's different ways of going about birth, right? Like, and it
Exactly.
doesn't all have to be the way what we've been conditioned and taught that it looks like, right? And so that's really my biggest yeah, like that one of the biggest things for me in even coming on this podcast is to really just give others, that information and that inspiration that you can absolutely have the birth that you've always dreamed of, with the right um yeah, like with the right supports, the right informations, all of that kind of stuff, right? Because like, yeah, like if I would have known what I would have known today, obviously hindsight's 2020. I think we
Yeah.
would have had a different scenario, right, with my first experience, kind of coming full circle. So yeah, those are my 4 experiences in the past 5 years. And it's safe to
That
say
is a wild journey, but so beautiful. I have to ask, like, how has this experience like changed your family, like you and your husband? Like, because I know that, you know, birth trauma doesn't just affect, the mom, it affects the family, it affects the husband, like, and they're usually witnessing, their partner go through these things. And I, it would be ridiculous to think that it doesn't affect, your life on like as a whole, and even the marriage, and so to have such a beautiful redemptive free birth experience,
Mhm.
I'm sure that's done amazing things for your family. So I'm just curious to hear. I know you're still newly postpartum, so
Yeah.
I'm sure it will continue to have its ripple
Absolutely.
effect.
Yeah, well, I really do have to commend my partner, my husband. He's just an incredible person, and he's been with me, like I said, 15 years, right? And I've been sober for 9 years now. I've been on my recovery and healing journey for 9 years. So there were those first 5 years that we were together that we went through hell and back, together. And he has loved me at my worst and loved me at my best. And the level, like, and this is interesting that you asked this question, because I was literally just talking to a good friend of mine recently about this, how the layers of our relationship, and how with this experience I've grown to like love him in such a different way, in like this deeper, almost like there's like a deep respect that I have for him, because when it was just him and I, in the depths of the birth experience, I felt so safe, so protected and so calm just with his presence there and him holding my hand. He didn't need to like coach me. He didn't need to like, he was just there, and he was so like steadfast in his like confidence in me, that it gave me even more confidence. Like I didn't sense any sort of fear around any of the, afterwards when I asked him, he was like, of course I was scared. He was like, but he's like, but I saw you, and he's like, and I saw how confident you were, and it gave me confidence. So we were almost like feeding off of each other.
Hmm.
But even for him, it was very healing as well, because like even though I'm the one that birthed our daughter and went through that experience, he was right there with me, like
Yeah.
he with me, he saw what happened to me as well, right? The aftermath, all of that kind of stuff, right? And I think it was really healing for him too, and he is very like open, like, and when we were talking about, when I was like sharing with him like research that I was doing and videos and all that kind of stuff, like he was just very much like, he felt empowered for me, where he was like, wow, like it made
Mm.
so much sense for him when I told him about how, like, just the world, the medicalized world that we do live in, and all the fear mongering and all that kind of stuff. And he was just like, it gave him more like he felt more confident as well, when I
Yeah.
was like sharing with him all this stuff. So yeah, it was just a really beautiful experience for both of us, very healing, and it brought us closer, closer than,
Yeah.
when now that our family is complete, it's just it feels amazing. And yes, it's still fresh,
Mm.
like we're 6 weeks postpartum, but I'm honestly like in such a better headspace than I was in any of my previous experiences, even though it's crazy, right? Because I have four littles now, and my
Right.
the three older ones are just full of life, full of energy, curious, all of that kind of stuff, right? But even like generationally, like even with my daughter, like I have talks with her, like, she's very curious and like wants to understand things and all that kind of stuff. And I tell her, like yesterday we picked her up from school, and she was like, "Mommy," she's like, "when I grow up, I'm gonna have a baby and I'm gonna feed him with my boob too." you know?
Oh, I love that.
And I was like, "Yes, you are. Yes, you are."
I love that. Raising little girls to be, strong women,
Yeah.
and know that,
Yeah.
and understand their bodies and know what their bodies are capable of doing is such a gift. And it's so healing,
Yeah.
because I mean, I know I didn't have that growing up. And so to be able to like offer this wisdom that I gained
Yeah.
over, the course of this life, and hand that to her is like, yeah, it makes it all worth it. And it's like
Yeah.
really healing.
Yeah, even my boys, like I'm very open with them. Like they're my little best friends, and they saw my postpartum healing, they saw me wearing the pads, all of that kind of stuff. And they of course they ask questions, like, Mommy, why are you bleeding? And I explained to them, like, because the baby came out and this is how mommy's healing. And I explained it in language that they can understand.
Mm-hmm.
But but they it's very matter of fact. I'm not gonna hide things from them or
Yeah.
be wrap it in shame or any. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Like, this is my body, this is what I went through. Even
Yes.
he's still a little bit swollen after. They're like, Mommy, why is the baby still in there? I was like, no, mommy's tummy is still swollen. It's gonna take some time for it to go down. It's healing. And they just like, they nod their heads, they're like, oh, okay. And so when they see me like not wearing a pad anymore, they're like, oh, did you stop bleeding now? I'm like, yep, and just like very matter
I
of
love
fact.
that.
It's just like there's no shame in any of this, right? And they're free
Yeah.
to ask me any questions. I will answer it. Obviously, aside from going into details of how baby was made.
Right. For now.
For now, exactly. But yeah, no, it was incredible. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy with how everything turned out. And again, I feel I'm a huge advocate now of just women having choices, and having informed choice around everything, and just like
Yeah.
my GP told me, I would tell anyone, just do as much research as you can, know all your options and your choices, because if not, you won't have any. And there's no worse circumstance than being in the midst of like labor, something going wrong, and then making a decision right then and there, in the heat of the moment without ever hearing beforehand, right? Like I've had friends who've had to have emergency C-sections. And I remember one of my friends who ended up with an emergency C-section, she told me, she was like, in all of my birth research, I would always skip that part, the C-section part, because I was like, I'm not having a C-section, like I'm gonna have a
Yeah.
normal delivery. Sure enough, she ended up with an emergency C-section. And I remember her telling me, like, I was so terrified because I didn't know what to expect, what like anything like that, because like it just came on me and it was like, we're gonna have
Yeah.
to you all that kind of stuff, right? She's like, and I regretted so bad skipping that part, right?
Yeah.
Because when you make a decision just based on fear, it's scary. It's so
Yeah.
scary, right?
Yeah,
Without
exactly.
blind fear kind of thing, right? So yeah.
I love that so much. And I'm so happy for you and your family that you got to experience birth like this. And yeah, I I wish, I pray for, all women to really embody the power that they have. And I believe every woman can have this experience if they choose it, and you chose it, and you are living proof that it works. Our bodies are designed to do this, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's so beautiful. Thank you so
Exactly.
much for sharing. And so
Yeah.
how can the listeners find you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's www.abigailteixeira.com. There's like all about me on there. I have a media page on there with all my podcasts, videos, interviews, speaking engagements, all that kind of stuff. And then my main platform for social media is Instagram. So that's where my personal blog is. And I have a little community that I built on there, mainly around, my trauma background and my healing journey and in that sense. But I definitely, of course, motherhood is a part of my life. It's part of who I am. And I do speak a lot on that. And especially lately, I've been speaking a lot more on birth and all that kind of stuff. So that my handle is at uh.vee. And I'll what that means, because everyone always asks me, like, where do you get that from? So my name's Abigail, and for short, it's Abby. I'm Latina, like Canadian, and my sisters call me Avi. And so like that's what it's kind of like a nickname that I've had since I was a kid. And like so that's what I
Oh,
named
I
my
love that. I love that. Well, I'm
yeah.
gonna put the link to your website in the description, because I know that people probably won't know how to spell your last name.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, thank you again, Abby. And we'll definitely connect again soon. I can't wait to
Absolutely.
continue following your journey.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You're such a great host, and I'm so happy and grateful
Oh,
for this
thank
connection.
you. I know that your story is going to touch so many women. I'm really excited for it to be out there in the world.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thank you.